I've also been studying and discovering there was in the Ojibwe culture of the sort of Great Lakes region, there was a lineage which had a kind of lodge of medicine men. They carried a secret knowledge of healing and spirituality, and they partly encoded this and wrote it down on birch bark books which have survived, and those are preserved secrets. Now, one chap who was the son of an Episcopalian bishop he became very interested in American Indian religion and Canadian Indian. He was given access to these birch bark scrolls, and he's written about them, and he was although a Western white Canadian, he was initiated into their lodges, and he shares that in his writings. So I've included him and his work in this mathematical study because some of the knowledge was mathematical. The role of number in American Indian religion is very interesting, and it's a neglected field, actually. Most historians of maths focus more on, say, Indian or African or European. But actually American Indian maths was fascinating. And there's an epic quote that that I love, which I put in the book. And I think this was from the Crow tribe, shared with someone who wrote it down. The Crow do not count above 1,000. As they say, honest people have no use for higher numerals. Just think about that a minute. That's in a book by Eales, who was a great expert on Native American mathematics. He wrote that in 1913. The Crow do not count above 1,000, as honest people have no use for higher numerals. I mean, most of us in our lives, we don't need numbers over 1,000. I mean, okay, I've got 12,000 books in my library, and I did once count them for insurance purposes. I've got 12,000 plus endless numbers of documents and pamphlets and booklets. But so yes, okay, I needed a big number for that. But normally in our normal day-to-day life, we don't use numbers of thousands. We have, I mean, in my periodic table, for instance, there's 163 categories of religion. I don't need thousands. And in terms of, if we have money, we don't normally have access to vast amounts of money. I mean, it's dishonest people that need vast amounts of numbers. And if you're trying to make a nuclear bomb, that's a terrible thing to want to do, then, you're going to need access to very large numbers. Well, the point the Crow were making, bless them, Native Americans, is that's all chicanery and to be avoided, that stuff. And anyway, I've quoted quite a few of these approaches. One other of the great numbering systems from Brazil only had two numbers, 1 and 2. And they then made all other numbers as a combination of 1 or 2. And you can do it. I mean, every number can be broken down into a multiple of 1 and 2. And so that's all they had. One thing that's absolutely certain is that for the Native American mind, number was sacred. It was in Western mathematics, we talk about numbers as a sort of divine emanation. And Iamblichus, who followed the Neoplatonic school, stated this in his theology of arithmetic, that number is divine, it's sacred, it's in the mind of God. Descartes, Gauss, many of the great mathematicians of history have said this. But they then stop. They don't talk about, well, how does it arise? What does that mean or imply? They just go on and play with the numbers. The American Indians haven't ever stopped honouring the sacred, honouring the Creator. So for them, when they share mathematical knowledge, it's done in the context of an initiatory system in which they're actually sharing teachings which are encoded in the numbers. And so, for instance, the number 4 is one of the most sacred numbers to the American Indian cultures. There are 4 directions. The 4 cardinal directions are absolutely central to their religion. Every prayer is done facing the 4 directions. Every smoking peace pipe is prayed to the 4 directions. Each is a different element: earth, air, water, fire. Each is a different animal spirit that guards it. Each has a different wind associated with it. All of them have their own qualities. And so when you're taught the mysteries of 4, you're initiated into a whole cosmology. It's not just a sort of number you're taught. It's something really, really sacred, and it's part of your tribal enculturation and your initiation. And the same with the other numbers. 3 is very, very important, particularly to the Hopi Indians. 3 was really sacred, and so on. 7 was incredibly important to them as well. So I've been putting all this in the book, and it's absolutely fascinating. Also, in the Peruvian tradition of the Incas, I discovered there's a whole... I knew about this, but I've now gone into the details. They didn't have writing as such. They kept their mathematical records on knots, and it's a tradition called quipu. And they had 2 main chords, and then you dangle other chords from there. And then from those ones, you then dangle subsidiaries. And each of these has a specific meaning. And if you're the keeper of the chords, keeper of the quipu, you might be doing one of 2 things. You might be either recording how many llamas there are up the mountain in that field, owned by such and such a person. Or you might be recording something to do with sacred law, the number of the gods, the way that Great Mystery is organising, the seasons and the calendar. Because the calendars also had to have extremely complex mathematical thinking behind them. The 2 chords from which these quipu strings come represent the male and female energies of Creator. And the chords are also colour-coded so that you can work out, whether you're talking about rice, beans, llamas, blocks for building or whatever. The Spanish conquistadors destroyed deliberately the quipu libraries that they found in Cusco and other places. They destroyed hundreds of thousands of these, which were the libraries, which the knowledge keepers could read. But there are about 850 examples that have survived and that are scattered in museums and libraries around the world. And scholars are now beginning to try and read these, and the tradition has survived enough. Fortunately, because people after the conquest who were Incan wrote it down, they learned Spanish and they were able to record these things. There was a great, some great, pioneers of history who could do that. Another figure that I mentioned before, which I've put in this chapter, who's very important to me personally, is Deganawida, because he was the peace teacher of the Native American tribes. He was the Moses or the Jesus of the native peoples, and he lived before the white man ever came. And he realised that the tribes cannot go on fighting. They weren't, like all people, they fell out, they had quarrels, and sometimes those quarrels involved tribal conflicts, and sometimes they led to battles and deaths and all the rest of it. And he was from the Great Lakes area, born in what's now Canada, actually. And he had a series of visions, prophetic encounters with spirit, which taught him that he had to bring peace to the people. And he devised this system of a confederacy whereby they would pledge not to attack each other and to take conflicts to a mediator, to a central fire, a council. And this is still intact. That tradition that he founded is still intact, and the people are still there. His name is greatly honoured in these tribes and throughout the Americas. And you know what was the absolute basis of it, which I put in the book, is what are called the 12 cycles of truth. Daffern he was part philosopher, part sage, part prophet, you know. He knew the importance of truth. Truth is what gets lost when people fall out. Truth is what gets lost when wars happen. Truth is what gets lost when there are family quarrels or divorces and that kind of thing. So for Daffern, he said, look, if we're going to restore peace to the people, they have to learn to revere truth again. And the 12 cycles of truth are amazing. If you read them, you know, my book will be published soon, I hope. But the very first one step of this is to learn the truth. Now, many people are not even there yet, because many people deny there's such a thing as truth, or by truth they mean their truth, not the truth. No, it's learn the truth, which is the collective wisdom of the tribe, the collective knowledge of your entire family and so on. Ultimately, it's in the shared common enlightenment mind of the collective people of humanity. The second stage on this process is to honour the truth. Okay, so having learned the truth, you then honour it, because, wow, you know, it's amazing truth, right? And like, honour thy mother and father is in the Ten Commandments. Well, you know who your mother and father are. You can't honour them unless you even know that. So learn the truth about your mother and father, and then honour them. Learn the truth about the Creator, and then honour the Creator. So this 12 cycles of truth works at all different levels. Later on, the stages are to love the truth. You know, when you allow your ego to dissolve enough so that your consciousness can blend and merge with cosmic truth, you realise love is all there is. So of course you love the truth, because the truth that you're loving is love itself. And so it's a process of collective psychotherapy, which, if it were applied, would bring peace to this planet still. That's why Daffern is so important to me as another peace teacher in the 20th century, 21st century. I honour his work, and he's in the book for the wisdom it conveys. Another one is Sequoia, who came from the Cherokee culture of the Oklahoma people, and I learned all about him when I went to Oklahoma. I went to the museum where they have a cabin that reconstructs him, his teachings. And what's so interesting about Sequoia is that although he was a native Cherokee teacher and elder, he also read the Bible, he studied Christianity, and he urged his people not to fight the Europeans, but to learn their medicine, to study what this Christ figure was teaching, and to absorb the best bits of it into their own cultural system. So he was someone that wasn't saying we should fight the different religions. No, learn the wisdom of each of them and synthesize them in love. And he said the trouble with these whites is that they're not applying the teachings of Christ. They're not listening to their own medicine teacher. Their sweet medicine brought wisdom to the Cherokee. They honoured it. But Christ brought medicine to the Europeans and Middle Eastern people, and they didn't honour it. They crucified him. And it's been catastrophe ever since. And so we need to rebuild what in Hebrew is called tikkun. That was Sequoia's point. And interesting enough, his body has never been found. He went on a pilgrimage right at the end of his life down to Mexico, and in that part of northern Mexico there are many, many sacred carvings on cave walls, petroglyphs they're called, many of which are mathematical. And I think Sequoia was going down to find a place with his ancestors that, he knew the wisdom had a source. And a lot of the people down there were using peyote. Peyote brought very strong visions and dreams, still does. and he was going back to his maker, to the creator. And in my reconstruction, I've got Sequoia's sharing where he's buried, and I situate this sort of powwow of the spirits in an amazing place in Wyoming called Medicine Mountain. Now it's a real place, and it has a site like Stonehenge called the Medicine Wheel, which is exactly like Stonehenge. What's so extraordinary is I'm 100% convinced that the ancestors of the Celts, the Druids, the ancestors of the American Indian tribes that built these great medicine wheels were coming from the same lineage, ultimately. They had the same knowledge. And what they were doing in the medicine wheel in Wyoming was the same as what the Druids were doing at Stonehenge and Avebury. They were using the cardinal points, they were doing prayer, they were honouring the Creator, they were honouring the Mother and Father of the universe. And they were doing, hand fastings, marriage, ceremonies, prayers for the initiations of different stages of life. Anyway, this place, Medicine Wheel, is now very, very sacred, still sacred to the native tribes, and people come from all over for pilgrimage. And it's having some of the same problems that Stonehenge is having, to do with ownership, who owns the site, who has the right to say when you can go. It's much less policed, thank God, than Stonehenge. English Heritage's control of Stonehenge is ridiculous, and they turn it into a cash cow, and that's why King Arthur Pendragon and myself and Rollo Morfling and the Council of British Druid Orders have been protesting. So I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge, so that we have a discussion about this with my friend George Fursoff, and we want it to become again a sacred site, like the Medicine Wheel is in Wyoming, which is primarily honoured and understood to be a sacred site in the custodianship of the spiritual elders, the Druid community, the pagan community, the Wiccans, the shamans who want to use it as a temple. And of course tourists can come, at certain hours of the day, but I think there should be a spiritual pilgrimage centre there 24/7, somewhere in the landscape, where the elders of the tribes of the Celts and Druids and so on, and Wiccans would share it in turn. So that's what I've said, and that's why I've been involved in the Stonehenge politics for so long, because to me it's about the restoring of the dignity of our own ancestral wisdom in Europe and Britain. And it's the same fight going on in North America, because the people in Wyoming, the elders, the native tribes, again, are blocked, obstructed, prevented from accessing it when they would necessarily like. But it doesn't. There used to be a big fence with barbed wire around it, with razor-sharp wires, like there is in Stonehenge. Amazingly, they campaigned and got that removed. There's now just sort of a small rope fence that you can step across. That's what we need at Stonehenge. Okay, so anyway, that's what I've been doing this week. It's great stuff, and it's coincided with the victory of Biden, who's appointed the first Minister of the Interior as a Native American woman. And thank you, Mr. Biden. You really are quite a good chap, I think. He understands the importance of the Native American Indian witness. He's also cancelled the Keystone Pipeline, which was going through their native lands. And I'm sure he'll, cancel the Dakota South pipeline as well, that goes through the Standing Rock area. His heart is in the right place. Biden has been brought up well to do the right thing, as far as I can tell. Now, all this horrendous attack on him and abuse, it's like they did with Hillary Clinton. Ignore it. Nobody's perfect. I'm sure Biden's done the odd thing he probably isn't very proud of. We all have. That's our humanity. But the kind of level of attacks on him, it's just it's the bitterness of losers. And the trolls and the renegades that have been creating mayhem and havoc. I call them the Discordians, who've been behind the Trump era, have finally gone, and so I want to celebrate that. And we've also had this last week, we've had on the 22nd, a couple of days ago, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has kicked in. This is incredibly good news. If you don't know that yet, well, you know, it's happened. Because over 50 nations have signed, quite a few in Europe here, Ireland, Austria, the Vatican, the Holy See has signed this thing, which is hugely significant. And a lot of the Catholic nations of the world are signing. And the whole of Latin America, Mexico, Peru, Chile, and so on. Gradually the world will all sign this treaty. All it's saying is we don't want nuclear weapons stored, manufactured, or deployed, or threatened to use on our land. I've joined several discussions about this. You know, obviously China says, well, we're not going to get rid of ours till you get rid of yours, and Russia says the same, in America and Britain. Well, the answer is get rid of them all simultaneously. You know, this is like the sweet medicine's thunder arrows. Let's apply those thunder arrows to simply getting rid of this dark medicine. This is evil. We don't want bombs that can destroy whole cities and that deform children and babies when you're taking the uranium out of the ground and processing it. We don't want these nuclear missiles off the Scottish lochs where they're poised to destroy 50 cities at once. One missile launched from one of those submarines can destroy 50 missiles because they have 50 separately targetable warheads. As I discovered when I did a peace protest outside the Faslane base where my Castle on the Muses was. So, no, we can celebrate the peace movement. Thank you. My mother was a heroic activist in the anti-nuclear movement. I branched out. I've gone more into sort of comparative philosophy. I run Philosophers for Peace. But I'm 100% with the anti-nuclear movement. And this is really a very important historic thing. But every other country that has these weapons still has to come to the table, and that means Israel, Pakistan, India, China, UK, USA, Russia, have to come and agree to simultaneously sign a treaty on, you know, whatever, the 1st of May 2022 or something. What about the 2nd of February, the 2nd of the 2nd, 2022? That'd be quite cool. Using the power of maths here. And let them all sign it together, and then nobody loses face. We all sign it together. And then the whole world can breathe a sigh of relief. You know, this is just like kids' stuff. We need to move beyond this nonsense. We can then focus on getting rid of all nuclear, biochemical and biological and chemical weapons, because, as I've said before, probably the COVID thing is a leak from a bioweapons lab. That's disgraceful. They shouldn't exist. They should be shut down. And Biden is probably the man to do all this. You know, this could never have happened with Trump in the White House. His brain level, his rhetoric, and his heart level, his morality wasn't up to it. Although he is proud of the fact he didn't launch any major wars. You know, thank you, Mr. Trump. You know, I'm not saying you did everything wrong. A couple of things you got right. That was one of them. But so what? We've got to thank you that you didn't launch World War III. I mean, you know, that's kind of like a protection racket. It's like, no, he yes, on Trump. I hope he has a successful retirement. I'm glad he's gone. I hope that he learns and reflects on his time in office, and that he faces the karma and the repercussions of what he's done, which we the people don't fully know and understand. But I think he's done some stuff that he probably shouldn't have done, and I suspect that he's going to end up in court in the near future, and he's in the process of being impeached for the second time. You know, what's very interesting as a philosopher is watching how justice rolls around. And it's, you know, justice is coming to Trump. And the role he played in exacerbating that attack on the Capitol was unforgivable, and just shows his lack of understanding and his inability to accept the Biden victory, and his promulgation of a false narrative. Going back to Dagan Oida and the importance of truth, you see, people that live by the sword use lies to promote and sustain their mendacity rule, if you want. And the other thing that I cannot forgive Trump for is Brexit, because he played a huge role behind the scenes. Let me rephrase. The people that put Trump into power, Bannon and co, and the Mercers, and the misuse of data and social media, those people also brought Brexit into being. Trump is a symptom of the disease, not the actual disease, although he became the disease. And Brexit is a symptom of the disease. Okay, what is the disease? How can we heal it? Because don't forget, I'm coming at this as a healer. Well, it's about lies. In the case of Trump, it was sheer, in-your-face, brazen manipulation of public opinion by social media, engineered by Steve Bannon and his cronies, Breitbart. You know, this whole unbelievable assault on the very concept of truth by the Bannonites. And the fact that Trump had the gall to pardon this man, who is a criminal, just shows you that we're dealing with a crime brotherhood, a criminal brotherhood here. And I suspect they're both going to end up in prison. It'll be fought in the courts, but I suspect it'll go there. I don't think that pardon is going to stand up to judicial review. Unfortunately, in Brexit, we have a more difficult situation. At least in America, they got rid of Trump. They can just reverse the policies and go back to normality. It's like, you know, a tube train coming into the daylight. With Brexit, the damage is lasting. What the Bannonites have done, and the Trumpites, and their Farageist cronies, and Boris Johnson, who's a sort of protege of this lot, is they've used social media to generate a sort of a cultural war, like a civil war in the UK, between the Brexit and the anti-Brexit, between the Scots and the English, between the different tribes that have all taken positions. I can't see any way out of this apart from a total overhaul of the UK Constitution, which I've written about and I've created a website for, which would bring transparency and truth back into the system. Brexit is a symptom of lies, and it came about because the British people have been lied to over it. During the campaign, the very concept of Brexit was a lie from the very beginning. And the people that promoted it have lied to themselves, have lied to each other, and have lied to the British people. Way back in 2016, when this was all going on, and I think it was before that, I proposed that we should have a new law in Parliament making truth-telling compulsory among these so-called politicians. And of course, it shouldn't be necessary to have a bill, but I'm afraid it is. But unfortunately, not only did anyone take me up on the suggestion, but the lying took off and became exponentially worse, and Brexit happened. And I think as a result of that, and you know, all the signs are that, as I've said all along, the only way out of this is for Scotland to disentangle itself from a union that has become a hotbed of lies. The Privy Council has become a sort of fester pit of lying, but it's screened from us. We can't see what's going on. But and the monarch has apparently lost her conscience. She's lost her ability to listen to her druids or advisors. The church has gone completely and utterly silent. There's been no voice of dissent from the Christian community, which ought to have opposed this, lock, stock and barrel from day one, because it's been hijacked and captured by xenophobic, racist, white nationalist, kind of elitist rhetoric that was behind Trump, this sort of what they call white supremacism. Well, the English have fallen for this. English supremacism is what's behind Brexit. But it won't last. It won't survive because, you know, when I lived in England for years, you just assume the English are the most important tribe on the planet. It never crosses your mind that they're not. For me, when I moved to Scotland and Wales and spent 10 years in both countries learning to see history through a completely different lens, it was part of my education. You know, I was studying Druidry at the time and learning about the ancient Celtic wisdom. And here I was living in Wales and realised there's a whole other narrative in which the English are not the heroes, actually. They're the conquering madmen. Then I was in Scotland for 7 years and again met a whole narrative tradition where the Scots are the heroes and the English are conquering demons, you know, who never played by the rules. And now I've moved to France, and again, I was taught that the French were the baddies, and the English were great, and we won Agincourt, and Henry V was a good man. But when you live in France, and you see things through the French eyes, you learn the English were marauding war criminals. Henry committed massacres over his prisoners. Joan of Arc was a heroine. According to Margaret Murray, she was, you know, of the ancient religion, as well as a Christian. And then, of course, the English found this out and killed her as a witch. Well, the revenge of the French was to get her declared a saint, and I'm with the saint lot. So, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I don't think the UK as we know it will survive. It won't survive. I mean, the Tory party thinks that if they just carry on telling lies long enough, persistently enough, using their lackeys in the BBC, everyone will start believing it. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. You know, people see through the lies. History sees through the lies. and these Johnson types will be gone. These liars. If you're interested, read my book on being and knowledge, which is an existential sequel to Heidegger and Sartre's Being and Nothingness. Being and Knowledge, I've talked about the ontology of truth. Truth is what endures because it has being on its side. This was Duns Scotus's point as well, years ago. He was one of the greatest philosophers in Scotland, in the authentic traditions of Scottish history, going back to, you know, the ancient times. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just telling you stuff that probably you already know. That Scottish independence is coming, and Nicola Sturgeon, who's a wily and clever Scot, and I love her very much, has said that she's going to call this second referendum, regardless of what Johnson does. She's in the sort of the flow of being, in the ontos, the Greek term for being. You know, the Tory party can't stop the fact that Scotland is a nation and now wants to reassert that in law, and wants to simply rejoin its rightful place in the European Union, which I can't wait for, you know. I've said before, there's a little place around the corner, a village called Écosse from me. The French and the Scots are old buddies. And if you've seen that wonderful movie series called Rain, all about Mary Queen of Scots being in France here at Amboise, you know, these are two ancient European nations. The English have been misbehaving for far too long, and it's time to call the whistle on that. And also the Irish. And, you know, I did set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and the main reason I found Brexit so stupid, why I feel so strongly to fast once a week about this, and I'm going to continue until, you know, the nations of the UK or British Isles have rejoined the European Union. It is such a crass mistake, led by liars, is because Ireland is a beautiful, wonderful country in its own right and deserves to have its unity reaffirmed. You know,